In this video, we're going to look into Introduction to History and Government, and these are topical questions and answers from the first topic of Form 1 work. The first question, define the term history. So history is defined as the study of man's past events in relation to their environment. The second question, identify two periods in history. In history, we have two periods. One is prehistory, and another period is called history. So prehistory is the period in history where the art of writing and drawing had not been invented. And history is now the period in history after the invention of the art of writing and drawing. Question 3. State two branches of history. We have three branches of history, and one is economic history, which deals with people's means of livelihood. We also have social history, and we also have political history. Social history deals with people's culture, religious beliefs, eating habits, and so on. But political history deals with the means of governance among the people. Question 4. Highlight three characteristics of historical events. And among the characteristics of historical events is that they must have evidence. Another characteristic is historical information must be either written or unwritten. Another characteristic, historical events only concern with man. That's why man is part of the keyword when defining history. Another characteristic, historical events must be factual. Another characteristic, historical events dwell mainly on the past happenings. They don't dwell in the present or in the past, in the future. They only dwell in the past happenings. Question 5. State three organs of government in Kenya and explain their function in relation to law. We have legislature, and its work is to make and amend the laws. And in Kenya, the legislature is bicameral, whereby it is divided into two houses, the lower house and the upper house. Another organ of government is executive, which has the role of implementing the laws which have been made by the legislature. And another organ is the judiciary. And the work of judiciary is to interpret this law and check whether they are constitutional or unconstitutional. Question 6. Identify the reforms of government. Among the forms of government, we have democratic government, and this is the form of government whereby it's the rule of people, or the people rule, either directly or indirectly. Whereby Abraham Lincoln defined democracy as the rule of the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So the people are in charge. Another form of government is aristocratic government, and this is where a group of people from the highest social class rules over others. We have like a king or a queen ruling over the other social classes. Another form of government is the monarchical government, and this is the form of government whereby democracy is practiced but aristocratic power is respected. Another form of government is dictatorial government, and this is an authoritarian rule where the ruler has total power over his subjects. Question 7. State two categories into which monarchical government is classified. We have absolute monarchy, and this is where there is unrestricted power of the head of state. Another category of monarchical government is constitutional monarchy, and this is whereby there is a king, but the king's power is restricted by the constitution. Question 8. Define the term government. So a government is a group of people within a state or a country given authority to control the affairs of the state or of the country. Question 9. Identify four characteristics of a government. Among the characteristics of government is rules, whereby all government has rules, and every government has laws which ensure that things run smoothly. After the laws or rules is law enforcement. And this is a characteristic of government whereby they make sure that these laws or these rules which have been put in place are followed, and those who break the rules or the laws are punished. And this is whereby through the police, the government maintains law and order. Another characteristic of government is legitimacy, whereby the government should be acceptable by the people. Another characteristic of government is jurisdiction, and this is the geographical area within which the government exercises its power. Another characteristic of government is sovereignty, and this is the supreme authority of the government to exercise its authority within its jurisdiction. Question 10. Discuss the reason for study of history in Kenyan schools. These are just the importance of studying history or the advantages of studying history. And one of the reasons as to why we study history is that it influences career choices, whereby study of history leads to careers such as teaching, whereby one can become an history teacher. One might become a lawyer through law, and one may end up in careers like international relations. Another point, it enables the learner to know the origin of mankind, its progress, and its development. Another point, it enables the learner to appreciate the achievements of man and learn from his failures. Whereby we learn from the achievements of man, and we appreciate the achievements of man, and we learn from how he failed so that we cannot repeat the same mistakes. Another point, it enables us to use the knowledge of the past to understand the present and to predict the future. Another point, it enables the learner to know the political, social, and economic organization of our societies. Another point, it provides intellectual fulfillment to the learner as it enriches one's mind with knowledge. Question 11. What is the importance of studying government? So, government helps us to understand, or study of government helps us to understand how laws are made and enforced. Another point, study of government helps us to understand the organs of the state and the powers vested in them. Another point, it helps us to understand how government raises and spends revenue. Another point, it helps us to compare our government system with systems of government in other countries. Another point, it makes us law-abiding citizens by making us understand our roles as citizens. Another point, it influences career choices. So those who specialize in careers such as public administration find study of government very useful because it is very relevant in those fields. Question 12. State 4 ways in which study of history and government inspires patriotism. 1. It enables one to develop positive values. Another point, it enables one to become loyal to his country. Another point, it enables the learner to be a responsible citizen. Another point, it enables the learner to acquire a positive attitude towards their country. Another question, into what categories are sources of information on history and government classified? So they are classified into 3. We have unwritten sources, written sources, and electronic sources. Question 14. Identify 4 sources of information on prehistory. We have oral traditions, anthropology, archaeology or paleontology. We have linguistics, and we have genetics. The keyword here is prehistory, whereby prehistory is the study of history of man when the art of writing and drawing had not been invented. So this question was asking about unwritten sources of information on history and government. Question 15. Name 4 forms of oral traditions. We have folk tales, we have songs, we have proverbs, we have stories or legends. Question 16. Identify 4 custodians of oral traditions. We have village elders as custodians of oral traditions. We have court workers, we have jesters, and we have griots. Question 17. State 4 merits of oral traditions as a source of information on history and government. Merits are advantages, and 1, it hands over historical facts from one generation to another in absence of written records. Another point, it is very useful among the illiterate since they can learn their history through oral traditions. Another point, it is a form of entertainment. For example, folktales and songs get people entertained. Another point, it complements other sources of information. Another point, it is captivating, especially when it is narrated by a person who participated in the event himself. Question 18. List 4 limitations of oral traditions as a source of information on history and government. Limitations are disadvantages, and one of the disadvantages of oral traditions as a source of information on history and government is that information may be exaggerated. Another point, some facts may be forgotten or omitted since it depends heavily on human memory. Another point, some information may not give dates and chronology of events. Another point, it is time consuming, whereby one requires a lot of time to interview an individual. Another point, it may be biased. Another point, it may be unreliable, as the informant may deliberately conceal some information. Question 19. Highlight 4 merits of linguistics as a source of information on history and government. 1. Facts can be obtained about movement of people and their relations. 2. It complements other sources and helps us understand communities with a common language better, as they may have a common origin. A good example is the Bantus. Other point, it has enabled us to understand historical links between different communities which were not previously known. Another point, it helps in dating of the migration of people from the parent language. Question 20. Highlight 5 disadvantages of linguistics as a source of information on history and government. 1. It is time consuming to learn a language, therefore delaying acquisition of information. Another point, there is danger of omitting a word when translating a language and thus losing vital information about a people's history. Another point, inaccurate information may be passed on where wrong words are borrowed from other languages. Another point, some languages have become archaic and irrelevant, hence difficult to understand. Another point, one word may have different meanings in different languages, and this can easily confuse the researcher. Question 21. Identify 3 key areas of studies by anthropologists. So anthropologists major on marriage, religious customs, forms of government, and cultural values. Remember, anthropologists go and stay with a certain group of people and study all these things about themselves. Question 22. Highlight 3 demerits of anthropology as a source of information on history. 1. It is time consuming, as it takes time to learn from strangers. Another point, it is expensive, as it involves living among the people. Another point, it is difficult for the researcher to adapt to the new environment of the people in question. Another point, people under study may try to behave differently when the researcher is around, and thus the researcher ends up missing important details. Another point, it is not reliable on its own, as it has to be complemented by other sources of information. Question 23. Identify 4 material remains which can be found in an archaeological site. 1, we have remains of crafts like baskets and pottery. We have carbonized seeds. We have remains of garments, remains of charcoal, remains of ponds, remains of plants, remains of dwellings, and remains of sculptures. Question 24. State 5 advantages of archaeology as a source of information on history and government. 1, it gives detailed information on material culture of man. Another point, it gives a sense of time as artifacts can be dated. Another point, it complements other sources, and this ensures authenticity of information. Another point, it gives a picture of human activities in the past. Another point, it provides information of varied nature, depending on the materials found on the site. Question 25. Highlight 5 demerits of archaeology as a source of information. 1, it is expensive, whereby one has to organize for skilled laborers, excavation, equipment, and laboratory analysis. Another point, it is difficult for archaeologists to locate sites where artifacts are buried. Another point, it is time consuming, whereby from identifying archaeological sites, excavation, all the way to laboratory analysis is a very long time. Another point, some artifacts and fossils are fragile and hence they can break during excavation or transportation. Another point, there are very few archaeological experts and facilities for interpreting archaeological information. Another point, it is difficult to identify particular people by name, language, or place of origin, basing on the fossils you've encountered. Number 26. Identify 4 ways in which archaeologists cite an archaeological site. 1. They look for areas where faulting or erosion has taken place, exposing surfaces which may give some clues on possible prehistoric sites. Another point, historical research, whereby they do research on areas mentioned in or on historical documents. Another point, ancient objects may be accidentally exposed during cultivation and building construction. Another point, they look for unique features such as stone patterns. Another point, their long experience and skills get them to locate a site. Question 27. Identify 4 problems faced by archaeologists in their work of rewriting history. One problem is that the exercise is too expensive. Another problem, it is dangerous and tedious, whereby animals like wild dogs can attack scientists. Another point, identification on the site is not easy because some artifacts are buried underground. Another point, some artifacts can be destroyed in the process of digging. Another point, dating of fossils is difficult. Another problem, personnel are few in small work. Another point, poor infrastructure in rural areas where the researchers are mainly based. Another problem, archaeologists may suffer from diseases caused by changes in climate. Another problem, sometimes the climate of their residence differs from that of the place they are taking the research, and this creates discomfort. Question 28. State 5 methods used by archaeologists in dating fossils. We have several methods, among them geological periods, chemical dating, stratigraphy, fission track dating, lexicostatistics dating, and statistical dating. Question 29. State 2 chemical methods of dating fossils. And one is radiocarbon dating. Another chemical method is potassium argon method. Question 30. Describe the categories into which written sources of information on history are classified. We have archives, we have manuscripts, we have printed or published records. Question 31. Identify 2 major forms of early manuscripts. We have stone tablets and scrolls. Question 32. Identify 2 major places where written sources of information on history and government are found. We have archives, like the Kenya National Archives, and we also have libraries. Question 33. Identify 5 written sources of information. We have books, maps, paintings, drawings, stone tablets, manuscripts. We also have newspapers or magazines. We have diaries or biographies. We have journals or periodicals. We also have official government records as written sources of information. Question 34. What are the advantages of written records on history and government? 1, they can be stored for future reference. Another advantage of written records is that they can reach or be distributed to all literate people all over the world. Another advantage, they promote literacy. And literacy is the ability to read or write. Another advantage, they are less costly as compared to archaeology and anthropology. Another point, they are accurate as the information is preserved exactly as it was recorded. Another point, they can be translated into many languages, which will enable many people of different languages all over the world to learn history. Question 35. What are the limitations of written records on history and government? One limitation or a disadvantage is that where an author omits essential information for one reason or another, makes the information unreliable. Another point, if the records are misplaced or destroyed, one may not get any information. Another point, written information may be misunderstood or misinterpreted by readers for one reason or another. Another point, some are not readily available for reference. For example, when controlled by the government, whereby the government can hide some sources of information or some documents. Another point, writers may be biased as they may write from their particular point of view. Another limitation, it is only limited to the literate in the society or those who can read and write. Another limitation, reading written records is often time consuming. It takes a lot of time to read a book or a document. Question 36. Name any 5 electronic sources of information on history and government. We have microfilms, we have radio, we have audiovisuals like televisions and videos. We have data banks and databases or computers. Question 37. What are the advantages of electronic sources of information on history and government? One, it captures information as it happens, as the scenes are recorded live. Another advantage, they can make the past come alive today. And another advantage, they give facts about events on a topic. Another point, the documents can be stored for future use. Another point, they can easily be accessible when need be. And lastly, they are faster in giving information. Question 38. What are the limitations of electronic sources of information on history and government? One, they may be biased. For example, most audiovisuals contain foreign materials carrying the bias of the producer. Another point, they may be inaccurate. For example, they may only give what is appealing to the public. Another point, they may be too expensive. For example, a television or a computer. Another point, they may be unrealistic as some contain exaggerated information. Another limitation or disadvantage is that some are limited to the literate only. For example, information in databases or in computers whereby only the literate people can benefit. Another point or another limitation, they are dependent on electricity, which is not stable or available in some areas.